Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT video. Today we'll be covering the top upcoming changes for set 4.5. We'll be covering these changes across two videos. This video will cover the champions and traits being removed along with a few other changes, while the second video will mainly cover the champions and traits being added. Due to the amount being changed, we'll only go over the changes with the most potential impact on the meta. Keep in mind that everything is subject to change during the testing period on the PBE, meaning nothing is fully set in stone just yet. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As mentioned, we'll be focusing on what's being removed and changed in set 4.5, and to start off, let's talk about a few of the traits being removed, beginning with Moonlight. Moonlight struggled to really fit well within TFT ever since set 4 came out on PBE. Either the trait ended up being too strong, specifically Aphelios, or was far too niche to be useful most games. The up and down balance caused a lot of headaches, both for players and the balance team. So with that in mind, we're listing Moonlight being removed as one of the top upcoming changes in set 4.5 because, well, that balance nightmare is no more. There's definitely going to be a small hole left with the removal of Aphelios, since he's one of the few low-cost carries. But overall, Moonlight no longer being part of the meta should end up being a positive. Next, let's talk about the removal of a pivotal synergy to the meta, Dusk. Dusk being removed will have the largest impact on the meta by far. Not even considering the champions themselves, the fact is that Dusk had a major role in practically every single meta since set 4 released. It's just such an easy splash trait in that it instantly gives a powerful boost to your whole board, plus it can do well as a focus of a composition, usually using 4 or 6 Dusk. Another important aspect of Dusk is that it increased the amount of magic damage in the game overall. This has led to the meta being very magic damage heavy with an emphasis on always running at least 2 Mystic. With Dusk gone, we may see a shift more towards physical damage, especially with the introduction of champions like Tryndamere and Olaf. Losing Dusk also comes with the loss of several key meta champions like Cassiopeia and Riven. Cassiopeia's role as a frontline CC can definitely be replaced, and it seems to be done by champions like Cho'Gath, but being a Mystic with good crowd control and good damage is going to be hard to replace. Riven, on the other hand, is a frontline champion that was much more unique than simply being a melee champion. Both of these units being gone will leave a noticeable gap in the meta that hopefully can be filled by new champions. And the last synergy we want to be covered that's being removed is Shade. Shade going away is going to shift the balance a lot since there's no longer going to be 2 traits that can jump to the backline. Now there's only Assassins, which means balancing around them will be easier, plus players will have more freedom with their positioning since they won't have to worry about Shade on top of Assassins. Really, what Shade going away means, and why it's on top as an upcoming change, is that Zed is no longer a ridiculously hard to kill carry. Sure, with his new trait, Slayer, he'll still do well, but the reason Shade was so good for him was the fact that it caused champions to drop aggro on him. Without that, it's going to make him infinitely easier to deal with. Since we're already discussing Shade, let's move into the champions being removed that will leave a large impact on the meta, beginning with Kayn. Kayn had a few times in the meta where he wasn't doing that well, though that was mainly due to his ability not actually working properly. Besides that, he's been a staple late game champion for most of the set. Having a 5-cost champion with access to the backline via Shade that does a lot of damage is practically always going to have a place in the meta. Plus, counterplay against Kayn was minimal as his ability was able to basically one-shot any unit that was isolated. Combine all of those factors and you have a late game champion that does his job a bit too well. And there was some overlap with Yone, who is also a melee champion damage dealer that seeks to get to the backline. But with Yone, there's a decent amount of counterplay, and they removed his knocked up, so he's overall balanced, while Kayn always teetered on the edge of being just a little bit too good. With Kayn being removed, it opens up the door for new 5-cost champions that have more counterplay and hopefully less overloaded kits. Speaking of overloaded kits, let's talk about another 5-cost champion being removed, Ezreal. Surprisingly, Ezreal never really felt overpowered considering how much his ability does. But the fact is, he just did too many things with his ultimate, as it would heal, apply an attack speed buff, and attack speed slow on enemies, do damage, and apply Dazzler if you had the active trait. That's just a lot of things to do for just one champion, even if they are a 5-cost. Because his ability provided so much, he caused a lot of redundancy in the late game. Champions that focused on healing, like Yuumi, weren't nearly as powerful as Ezreal, or the fact that he could apply the Adept slow to most of the team without you needing to play Adept. The overlap his kit had with other aspects of the game meant removing him was easily doable and opened up the door for more diverse 5-cost champions to be added. That's why his removal is another top upcoming change in set 4.5. Alright, let's move on to the next champion being removed, Ahri. If there was only one champion being removed in 4.5 and they said it was Ahri, it's likely most players would nod in agreement. Ahri has just been far too problematic of a champion to keep in the game, as balancing her always pushes her into a position where she may overtake the meta completely. That's just the nature of any AoE focused champion that does a boatload of damage. The main problem with Ahri was her lack of counterplay. Sure, you could add in Mystic, maybe even a Dragon's Claw, but at the end of the day, a stacked Ahri could potentially wipe out most of your board. With Aurelion Sol being added in as a replacement to Ahri, it will hopefully balance him around the idea of providing counterplay. Another healthy change that should occur with the removal of Ahri is that Spirit should become a trait once again. Because it relied heavily on Ahri and buffing it meant buffing Ahri, they could properly tweak the synergy to be usable without being too good. So once you look at all the potential positives from removing Ahri, it's easy to see why her going away is a worthwhile change that will have a large impact. Next, let's talk about the removal of Jhin. Jhin has been an interesting champion in the meta because he's filled a role of being a ranged carry so well that he's never felt too overpowered. The problem with Jhin is that he's just too much of an all-around strong carry, whether you're utilizing his traits or not. And if you do use his traits, he's pivotal to them, such as being the carry for cultists and the primary damage dealer for sharpshooters. Speaking of sharpshooters, Jhin is such a key champion for the trait that it made balancing them difficult. Either the trait was too good and thus Jhin was too good, or it was slightly on the weaker side and the only worthwhile investment for it was playing Jhin. Now that he'll be out of the picture, they can balance around the new sharpshooters and hopefully arrive at a healthier balance. One other aspect of Jhin being removed also ties in with Ashe going away. With 2 4-cost range carries that primarily focused on auto-attacking being removed, they suddenly have the opportunity with Xayah and Kayle to add more diversity to the champion pool while focusing less on dealing damage with physical attacks. We'll have to see how it plays out exactly, but overall, it should feel like we have more options to play with. We have one last champion to talk about, and that's Warwick. Champions that have 3 traits usually have some of the highest impact in the meta, and that was certainly the case for Warwick. Whether you used him for Brawler, Hunter, or Divine, he filled in for a lot of compositions. Warwick being removed may have the most negative change simply because of how important he has been in the meta. There's not much else that needs to be said, just that the task of replacing a champion like Warwick is going to be difficult. Let's move on now and talk about a few of the upcoming changes that we'll see in set 4.5. To begin, let's go over what they're changing about Morgana and how it may impact the meta. Morgana will no longer have Dazzler with the trait being removed, but instead have a new trait, Siphoner. Siphoner is similar in concept to Celestial from set 3, and that provides healing to the whole team, though Siphoners will gain more healing than the other champions. Because of that additional healing, they did remove the baseline healing for Morgana's ability. They've also incorporated Dazzler into her ability by causing it to reduce attack damage on top of the reduced magic resistance. When you combine these changes and the fact that they just pushed out buffs to the defensive stats of Morgana in patch 11.1, it's clear that the role they want her to fill is to be more of a frontliner. The new and hopefully improved Morgana is mainly a top upcoming change because she'll have more of a focused role in the meta. It's likely that we're going to see Siphoner used like Celestial was as a splash trait, and Morgana is going to be one of the key champions for it since she has strong debuffs in her kit, plus can be used as a frontliner. Another champion being changed in set 4.5 is Kindred. Kindred has served as one of the best 3-cost champions for quite a while now, despite the fact that their traits really didn't matter that much for them. Sure, there was a time that Spirit overtook the meta, but since it was balanced entirely around Ahri, it never really mattered that much for Kindred. Hunter was definitely important, but it mattered more for Aphelios and Ashe. So now Kindred will instead have Executioner, as Hunter is being removed entirely. Executioner makes the champion spells and attacks become criticals when the targets they are attacking is below a certain health threshold. This fits well for Kindred since their ability is all about doing a big burst of damage. May end up that Kindred fills the same role that they already do by just being a trait bot for a strong carry like Xayah or Kayle, but it's also likely that they'll have an increased role in the meta. Especially with Ahri being removed, there's much more room for Spirit to be playable, which in turn increases the value of Kindred. We have one last change to talk about, and that's with the new mechanic being added, Lucky Lantern. Lucky Lantern is a drop that every player in the game will get, though it's not always guaranteed that will show up each game. Basically, it's a loot orb that can drop a multitude of different things, including items, gold, and champions. In addition to that, it can also drop new items such as an item reroller, a shop reroller, an item remover, or a training dummy. Each of these new items has a special effect, like the item remover that will pop items off of a champion. The addition of these items, and the Lucky Lantern in general, is similar in theme to the random elements Galaxies brought back in Set 3. We'll have to wait and see how this new mechanic pans out, and whether or not adding an extra layer of randomness is good for the game. Either way, the Lucky Lantern is likely the #1 top change coming out with Set 4.5, since it has the potential to impact the game the most. That's going to be it for today's video, folks. As mentioned, this video is part 1 of a 2-part series delving into the top upcoming changes for Set 4.5. In part 2, we'll be covering the newly added champions and traits, so be sure to check out the video when it releases. Let us know in the comment section below what change you're looking forward to most in Set 4.5. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.